The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine sand as I watched Linda Garrison, our HOA president, march down my private beach with the determination of a general leading troops into battle. Her voice carried over the gentle waves as she shouted at my guests who were enjoying their morning coffee on the shoreline. "This beach belongs to the Sunset Cove community," she declared with a tone that could freeze salt water. "You people need to leave immediately or I'm calling the police." I set down my own coffee mug and walked calmly toward the commotion, reaching into my jacket pocket for a document that would change everything. As I unfolded the deed to my property, I couldn't help but smile at what was about to unfold. "Actually, Linda," I said with measured calm, "this beach is mine. And before you argue, you might want to know something else." I pulled out a second set of papers. "I also own the land beneath your house. In fact, I own the entire residential block you're standing on." The color drained from her face as she processed my words, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. After 30 years building a commercial real estate empire in the city, I had decided to retire to the quiet coastal town of Sunset Cove. The beach house I purchased came with something special that few properties offered anymore: a half-mile stretch of private beach, deeded and documented since 1892. The previous owner, an elderly gentleman named Walter Frederick, had maintained the property impeccably but rarely used the beach access. When he passed, his children sold it to me, happy to find someone who appreciated its unique features. I moved in quietly, keeping to myself, and enjoying the peaceful mornings watching dolphins play in the surf. My neighbors seemed pleasant enough, waving when they passed by on their evening walks along the public beach that bordered mine. I installed discrete markers showing where my property line ended and the public area began, making sure to leave plenty of space for everyone to enjoy the coastline. For 3 months, life was perfect. Then, Linda Garrison decided I was a problem that needed solving. It started with a letter slipped under my door on official HOA letterhead. She claimed my exclusive use of the beach section was against community standards and demanded I remove my property markers. I responded politely, including copies of my deed and survey showing the beach had been private property for over a century. That should have been the end of it. Instead, Linda escalated. She began telling neighbors I was a selfish outsider trying to steal their beach access. Never mind that they still had miles of public beach to enjoy. She wanted my beach, and she was going to get it. The harassment intensified week by week. First, she filed noise complaints whenever I had friends visit, even though we never made more sound than gentle conversation and laughter. The police stopped responding after the third false report. Then, she had the HOA install bright floodlights that happened to shine directly into my bedroom windows at night, claiming they were for community safety. The real escalation came when I returned from a weekend trip to find she had installed a chain-link fence across my beach access path. A large sign read, "HOA property, members only." She had literally fenced off my own land. I removed the fence immediately and filed a complaint with the city. But Linda wasn't finished. She began holding HOA meetings specifically about the beach problem, painting me as a villain who wanted to destroy their community values. She even hired a lawyer to research ways to challenge my property rights, funded by a special assessment she pushed through against the other homeowners. What Linda didn't know was that I had spent 3 decades in commercial real estate. I understood property law better than most attorneys, and I had resources she couldn't imagine. While she was busy plotting her next move, I was conducting my own research into the Sunset Cove development. What I discovered was fascinating. The original developer of Sunset Cove had run into financial trouble in 2008 during the recession. To stay afloat, they sold the land under several houses to investors while retaining the structures themselves. It created an unusual situation where homeowners owned their houses but leased the land beneath them. Most residents never knew because their land leases were paid automatically through their mortgage servicers. Through my old business connections, I learned these land parcels were being quietly marketed to institutional investors. The current owner wanted to sell the entire portfolio as one package. The price was reasonable, the return stable, and I saw an opportunity. I purchased the land rights to 15 properties in Sunset Cove, including the lot beneath Linda Garrison's house. The afternoon everything changed started like any other. I was hosting a small barbecue for some new friends when Linda appeared at the edge of my property with 2 HOA board members in tow. She had brought official-looking documents and a smartphone to record what she clearly thought would be her moment of triumph. "This is your final warning," she announced with a self-satisfied tone. "The HOA has voted to reclaim this beach for community use. You have 24 hours to remove your no trespassing signs or we'll do it for you and bill you for the cost." I looked at my guests apologetically and asked them to give me a few minutes. Then I walked over to meet Linda on the sand, carrying a leather portfolio I had been keeping for just this moment. "Linda, before you do anything rash, I think you should look at these documents." I handed her the first set of papers. "This is the original deed to my property, including the beach. It's been upheld in court 7 times over the past century." She barely glanced at it, pushing it back at me with disdain. "Old pieces of paper don't matter. The HOA has authority over all common areas." "This isn't a common area," I explained patiently. "But let's set that aside for a moment. I have something else you need to see." I pulled out the second set of documents. "These are the land leases for 15 properties in Sunset Cove. I purchased them last month." Her expression shifted from smugness to confusion as she scanned the papers. "What does this have to do with anything?" "Look at page 7, I suggested. You'll find your address listed there." The moment she found it, her face went white. The 2 board members leaned in to look, their expressions mirroring her shock. "You're lying," she said with a voice that had lost all its authority. "Call your real estate attorney," I offered. "In fact, call the HOA's lawyer. They can verify everything. Your house sits on land that I now own. You've been harassing your landlord for the past 6 months." One of the board members, a man named David who had always seemed uncomfortable with Linda's tactics, pulled out his phone. "I'm calling our attorney right now. This is serious." While we waited for the call back, Linda tried to regain control. "Even if this is real, you can't just evict people. We have rights." "Of course you do," I agreed. "Your lease is valid for another 40 years, and I have no intention of evicting anyone. I'm not vindictive, Linda. I just wanted to live in peace on my own property." The phone rang and David put it on speaker. The HOA attorney's voice was grave as he confirmed what I already knew. The documents were legitimate. I owned the land beneath more than a quarter of the HOA's homes. "This changes our entire legal position," the attorney said with obvious concern. "We need an emergency board meeting immediately. And Linda, I strongly advise you to cease all actions regarding the beach property." The emergency HOA meeting was held 3 days later in the community center. Word had spread quickly, and the room was packed. Linda sat at the board table, but her usual commanding presence had evaporated. She looked smaller, older, and thoroughly defeated. I had requested time to address the association, and they couldn't really refuse. I stood before my neighbors, many of whom had been poisoned against me by Linda's campaign. "I want to be clear about my intentions," I began with a calm and professional tone. "I purchased these land leases as an investment, but also as protection. I have no plans to raise lease rates beyond normal inflation adjustments, and I certainly won't evict anyone who continues to pay their lease." The relief in the room was palpable, but I wasn't finished. "However, I do have some proposals for the board's consideration. First, I move that the HOA president position be subject to immediate recall given the legal liability Linda has created for the association through her harassment of a property owner. The association could be sued for her actions, and your insurance may not cover intentional misconduct." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. David seconded the motion immediately. "Second," I continued, "I propose that the HOA formally acknowledge in writing that my beach is private property, and that any future interference will be met with legal action." The association has already spent $37,000 on Linda's vendetta against me. How much more are you willing to waste? A woman in the front row raised her hand. How do we know you won't use your land ownership against us in the future? Fair question, I acknowledged. I'm willing to sign a covenant guaranteeing that as long as I own these land leases, I will not raise rates beyond standard inflation or evict anyone without cause. But that covenant is contingent on the HOA respecting my property rights. The vote was swift and overwhelming. Linda was removed from her position by a margin of 47-3. The HOA formally recognized my beach as private property. The special assessments she had imposed were reversed. As the meeting concluded, Linda approached me with tears streaming down her face. "You've ruined everything," she said with a broken voice. "This was my community. I made it what it is." "No, Linda," I replied quietly. "You made it a battlefield. Communities are built on respect, not control." The final twist came when the local newspaper picked up the story. It turned out I had been in negotiations with the Coastal Conservation Trust to donate a portion of my beach for a public nature preserve. It would have created a protected habitat for sea turtles while still allowing controlled public access for education and recreation. But after months of harassment and legal threats, I had withdrawn from the negotiations. Instead, I installed a beautiful wrought iron fence along my property line with signs that read, "Private property. Respect it or lose it. A gift from your former HOA president." Linda's humiliation was complete when the story went viral on social media. The Conservancy publicly confirmed that her actions had cost the community $1 million ecological donation. She became the face of HOA overreach, her photo attached to articles about property rights and neighborly respect. 3 months later, she sold her house and left Sunset Cove. The new HOA board sent me a formal apology and a promise of cooperation. I accepted it graciously, but kept my fence up as a reminder. Because sometimes the best neighbors are the ones who understand that good fences don't just make good neighbors. They make it clear that respect for boundaries, both physical and personal, is the foundation of any healthy community. Linda learned that lesson the hard way, when she discovered that the man she tried to bully off his own beach owned the very ground beneath her feet. Her reign of petty tyranny ended not with a bang, but with a whimper, as she stood in a community center watching 47 hands rise to strip her of the only power she had ever known.